Sustainable development. You've probably heard this term thrown around a lot, right? On company websites, in the news, and government reports, it's everywhere. But what does it actually mean? It sounds super important, but let's be honest, it can also feel a little, fuzzy. So let's break it down and really get into one of the most influential ideas of our time.
At its very core, the whole concept really just boils down to a single, massive question for all of humanity. And it starts with this. How do we, the people living right now, get what we need to live good lives? You know, food, shelter, jobs, well-being, the whole deal.
And here's the kicker, the second half of that challenge. How do we do all of that without completely wrecking the planet and using everything up, making it impossible for our kids and grandkids to meet their needs? How do we build a better world today without stealing from tomorrow?
This quote right here, this is the world's most famous attempt to answer that question. It comes from a landmark UN report from 1987, the Brundtland Report, and it's basically been the go-to definition ever since. It's got two really key parts. First, the idea of needs, especially for the poorest people in the world, and second, the idea that our environment has limitations.
Okay, so this brings us to something that trips a lot of people up. We use sustainability and sustainable development like they're the same thing, but there's a really useful distinction. Think of it like this. Sustainability is the destination. It's the goal, that future world we're trying to build. Sustainable development is the journey. It's all the different roads and pathways we have to take to actually get there. So if sustainable development is the journey, what's our roadmap? Well, the most popular way to think about it is as a kind of balancing act. You're trying to juggle three huge, essential things all at once.
And these are the three pillars. You've got the environment, which is all about protecting the planet. Then you have the economy, which is about creating prosperity. And finally, you have society, which is about fairness, well-being, and people. Now, the key thing here is that you can't just focus on one and ignore the others. Real sustainable development only happens in that sweet spot where all three overlap, where you have economic growth that doesn't destroy the planet and that actually benefits everyone fairly.
Now, you might be thinking this whole thing sounds pretty modern, right? Like something that came out of the big environmental movements in the 60s and 70s. But the core idea behind it actually has some surprisingly deep roots.
The history is pretty fascinating. I mean, get this. All the way back in 1713, a guy in Germany named Hans Carl von Carlowitz was already talking about sustained yield in forestry, which is basically the idea that you shouldn't cut down trees faster than the forest can regrow them. Sound familiar? Then you fast forward a couple of centuries to 1962, and Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book Silent Spring sounds this huge alarm about how economic growth was damaging the environment. That helps lead to the 1987 definition we just saw, and eventually to 2015, which is when this whole concept went from just an idea to a full-blown global action plan.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. This is the story of how sustainable development became the foundation for, well, basically the entire world's shared to-do list for the 21st century. The first big global effort was something called the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs. They ran from 2000 to 2015, and they had 8 main goals, mostly focused on tackling extreme poverty. But when their time was up, the world decided to replace them with something way, way more ambitious, the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The number of goals jumped from just 8 to 17, and that huge leap shows a massive shift in thinking. It wasn't just about poverty anymore. Suddenly, it was about everything: climate change, inequality, clean water, justice, peace, the whole shebang. And this is a really critical evolution of the idea. The modern version of sustainable development has social justice baked right in. A huge majority of these goals, 11 out of the 17, have specific targets about improving equity, equality, or inclusion. It's basically the world agreeing you simply can't have a sustainable future if it's not also a fair and just one. But, and this is a big but, for all its ambition, this concept is not without its critics. In fact, for years, people have been asking some really tough questions about whether this whole idea even makes sense. The single biggest criticism cuts right to the chase. Is the term sustainable development an oxymoron? I mean, think about it. Can you really have endless development, which almost always means economic growth, on a planet that has very real, finite limits? Are those two words, sustainable and development, fundamentally fighting each other?
And the arguments against it are pretty powerful. First, some say our whole model of development is just broken and can never be sustainable. Second, that the term itself is so vague and wishy-washy that it can mean anything anyone wants it to mean, which makes it kind of useless. And that vagueness leads to what critics call weak sustainability. That's the version you see all the time. It's about making our current systems a tiny bit better, like building a slightly more fuel-efficient SUV, instead of asking if we should be investing in public transit in the first place. It lets you look green without making any real hard changes. And maybe the most damning criticism of all, for some, is just looking at the scoreboard. We've had this idea for decades, and yet our biggest environmental problems keep getting worse.
So all of this leaves us with a huge open question. The core definition of sustainable development we all use is from the 1980s, a completely different world. So is it a timeless guide, a North Star that can still lead us to a better future? Or is it an outdated idea that's now holding us back, letting us feel good while avoiding the truly radical changes we need to make on a planet that is changing faster than ever? That's the debate that's going to define our future.